an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, the book club, covering childhood favorite Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. In this episode, this is one of my favorites, but Jaime had some trouble with it, so we're going to see how it all went down. Welcome to Unspoiled. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha.
I am Jaime.
So, ma'am, how did it go? Did it continue to be as difficult as it had in the beginning? Did it get any easier? Or how did you feel about it in the end?
Well, it's a weird thing because while I was reading, like, certain chapters really got me. Certain things I really liked. The language is always a struggle for me when it's an older written book. Mm-hmm. I think it's why I don't read a lot of classics, because I find the language to be so flowery and exhausting.
Didn't you do The Book Thief with me?
Yeah.
That's so funny, because that was my complaint in that book, but you didn't seem to have the same reaction to it. So
I did this time around, not when I originally read it. And I think it's that it feels like, because these books, stuff like this, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, it's contemporary for them. Mm-hmm. So I have such a hard time understanding, like, how did people just say what you want to say? Don't, like, fluff it up. Just say what you need to say. There's no plain language. So I struggled with that a little bit. But ultimately, I really like the story. I watched the miniseries between last night and today.
I haven't seen that. I should watch that.
It's on Amazon Prime. It's pretty good. They really sped through the ending, though, which kind of disappointed me.
They always do, and it makes me so sad.
And then I've read up a lot about Louisa May Alcott and how she felt about this book, how she just in general felt about femininity and masculinity and a woman's place. Mm-hmm. And that makes me appreciate it more and less, because she kind of didn't like this at all. And I feel like that kind of shows. Yeah.
Well, all right. So get into that. Talk about what you discovered in that regard, because I find Louisa May Alcott herself to be really fascinating. And that's part of why this book means so much to me, is just because the author herself was so complex and felt so out of her time. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like she would do so well today in this world that we have now that understands a little bit more about gender constructs. And there's always been a suspicion in my mind that she was either gay or maybe even trans. That because there has in everything that I have read of hers, because I've read more besides this, there's a feel to her of feeling like she is was born into the wrong body, genuinely feeling like, almost saying that verbatim a couple of times. So about this book, what did you find out about her feelings towards this?
Well, I know that she Jo was her avatar. You know, like, Jo was basically her, except that she never made the choice to get married and have children. Right. She was kind of resentful that she was pushed towards that kind of ending. Mm-hmm. She wanted Jo to put her career ahead of those typical things that were expected of women. Mm-hmm. And also she wrote a lot of stories under a pseudonym that were more fantastical, where the women were much more aggressive and had more agency and were adventurous, and the kinds of things that Jo also was writing in this book that then the professor, like, criticizes over, and so she stops doing it. Yeah. And so, like, I find that stuff really fascinating. She wanted something more. She didn't confine herself to what was expected of her socially. Her father was batshit.
The stories about her father in particular make Mr. March all the more like kind of heartbreaking because it's so clearly like what she wished her dad could be, you know, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, her father like almost destroyed all of their lives. I read that at one point he wouldn't let them eat root vegetables because they grew towards hell.
Yeah. Yeah, he was like a combination of like a weird like superstitious fundamentalist, but also like this idealist in terms of, I mean, her family was like friends with like Henry David Thoreau, like genuinely believed in the living off the land, getting back to nature and being closer to God through that, which I can respect. But when combined with this other weird, like you said, not eating root veg, how do you get back to nature but like disdain whole aspects of it? Like that, you know, yeah.
There was also a thing about how she respected Emerson so much that she was afraid of disappointing him, which is part of why she wrote stories under a pseudonym, because she didn't want him to judge her because she held him in such high esteem. And a story like Little Women really fit into the kind of thing that he would appreciate.
Right. He was her bear.
It like all makes me kind of sad. Also, I kind of hate some of the characters. It was really hard for me. Like,
who was the character you hated?
Amy.
Amy's my favorite.
I'm not surprised. And I love you, but I found Amy exhausting from the get.
She is. That's part of what I like about her. And that's part of what always breaks my heart in terms of the way this book is adapted. Because like you said, they will all but ignore the second half of this book. You know, like it's rushed through or not even done. And Amy is insufferable in the first book. I mean, it is like every time she speaks, you're just like, oh my God, I just want you to go away. And in the second half, I feel like she really tries to be like, sometimes you can come into yourself and that can, you know, all of these preoccupations can settle into some common sense and some like grace and goodness, but it's never really done in the adaptations. And so whatever you felt about young Amy remains with older Amy. And so Laurie getting together with her makes you go, what the fuck? Like, just because he had to marry one of the March sisters, really? That's all it is that he just got paired off with one of them?
Well, before I'd read this, I had seen the Winona Ryder version with Christian Bale. And that's all I knew of Little Women was that adaptation, which in a lot of the things that I read is a lot of people's opinion the best adaptation of this book. But what I remember is like, why the hell would he marry Amy? She's awful. And she was awful when she was older in that version, too. I did really, like, one of my favorite things in the entire book was when she confronts him. And she's like, you're lazy. You have no ambition. And why would anybody want to be around you? I don't want to be around you. And she puts him in her place. And it was not entirely surprising because you see her growth. But at the same time, I was still like, and now he's marrying her? Okay.
Yeah, what I've liked about, and sorry guys, we're probably going to do this bouncing around talking about things like character by character rather than the actual plot stuff because it's a huge book. So we'll just talk about like the parts that particularly stuck out to us. But I'm just excited because the bringing up Amy first, like most people don't like her and I totally get it, you know, but I relate to her so deeply because I have always had the same streak of selfishness, except that I have been very good about hiding it my whole life. I never voice how I feel about things the way that Amy did, but I sure thought them a lot of the time and then immediately judged myself for it and was like, oh, that's just shitty. Don't say that out loud. Don't let anybody know that you feel that way. But I felt it for sure. And her obsession with aesthetic and her desire for things to be elegant and beautiful and always trying to do a little more than she really was capable of doing with the resources that she had. That is like so my MO in life. that I just related so deeply to it. And
you're turning me around a little bit. I'm reevaluating my feelings, and not just because of what you're saying, but because I'm realizing that I'm sort of hanging on to early stuff. When we get to Meg, I'll have more to say.
So yeah, Amy's like growth is almost never in adaptations. The whole thing when she's like in her middle years and she's at that fair, for example, and she's trying to like make people happy and treat them the way that she wishes she could be treated, and like turn aside when somebody is kind of shitty to her and just be like, you know what? Yeah, they were shitty to me, but I also want this thing that's doing good for everyone to be a success, and I'm going to let it slide, and I am going to continue to like be a lady in the most pure sense of the word, not with the gendered bullshit around it, but what she thinks that means. I am always so sad that that's never in any of the adaptations, because I think it's not really beautiful, you know? And her going out with Joe to like to call on different people and try and really being like, you know, I know that you don't want to visit on March because we see her all the time, but she appreciates when we make a formal call and treat her as somebody who matters in our lives outside of her just being family. And Joe being like, oh, you're right. That is a really nice thing to do. And I don't even think of things like that. And it's just little things like that that Amy is, I don't feel like she ever quite totally outgrows her selfishness exactly as much as she learns how to turn it into something else, where her selfishness is like, I want to do something to please somebody because it makes me feel good. And I know it will benefit me in the end to be kind to everybody, which is like, there's a practicality around that I know a lot of people disdain, but I think is really like, it still works, you know? I still really appreciate that. So yeah, when she takes Lori down a peg or two and just basically like, listen, I know you're heartbroken and everything, and that's valid, but like, you need to start to man up and stop being such a little fucking baby about it. I was like, yeah, oh, girl, I love you so much. So yeah, she's like the one that I feel gets the shortest shrift in practically every version that I've seen.
It's easier to show this very selfish, very like kind of arrogant and vain opposition to Joe.
Right. Totally.
And I feel like many adaptations of this and interpretations of this focus on Joe and Beth. They want to portray the tragedy of Beth.
Right.
And they want to show the strength of Joe. And in order to make Joe even more of an like literary icon, they have to show how she's affected by everyone else instead of how she also affects other people.
Agreed. And I think people see her and Beth as being real foils to one another, and so focus on the two of them because Beth is so gentle and so much more domestic, and that's everything that Joe seems to not want to be. That leaves Meg and Amy in the background in this weird sort of nothing space a lot of the time. Yeah. And so the book just, the way that she copes with she really gives each of these girls the attention. Yeah. That you don't like. I went into reading this not expecting that at all because I had seen the movie first and was like, oh, there's a lot here about everybody. So you had mentioned wanting to talk about Meg. What's going on with Meg?
Meg is, I feel, everything that the author resents about what is expected of women. She's beautiful. She also is pretty selfish in a way. Like, she tries to not be, but she's so concerned with how poor they are and appearances.
And it's tough for Meg because she was born and remembers the time when they had money. And all of the other girls sort of grew up in the era of their family where the fortune was already gone. But Meg has like some memories of back when we were able to do things a certain way and really clings to that a lot because she is the only one who really remembers it.
Yeah, but it's like her main personality trait. I hate that we're poor. I wish we could afford things. I want these dresses. She like spends all of her husband's money to buy a dress because she's hanging out with a friend who has more money. And I'm not entirely judging. Like, I like nice things, and I have definitely spent money that I can't afford to spend to buy myself something because I grew up with nothing. And the way that I counteract that is by treating myself to things when I can, and sometimes when I can't. So I get it, but it's just kind of boring that that's her only thing. She wants nice things. She wants to get married, and she's pretty.
Yeah, I don't like. I do agree. Like in terms of the four of them, in a lot of ways, I do find Meg to be the least interesting because of how conventional she is. But I also do like that because of her being as conventional as she is, we get to see her make some really like interesting mistakes or experiments that I found sort of fascinating. Like, she goes to stay at Sally's house for 2 weeks. And she goes and she's very excited to be able to go. And even though her things aren't as nice as she would like them to be, she's like, but this is still going to be a beautiful experience. My sisters have lent me so many things. It's lovely. And tries to really make the best of it. And then she gets there and can't help but just be like, oh, God, I really don't fit here. Like, everybody's really nice. Her family is very, like, friendly, and they're not snobby or anything towards me, which is something, again, in the adaptations, I feel like they make Sally Moffat and, or Gardner. She
Moffat.
winds up being Moffat later, right? She marries Ned. But they make her a lot sillier and a lot more snobbish and mean girlish, and she's really not. They stay friends forever pretty much, but Meg allows herself to be sort of dolled up and enjoys this like moment of having all of her wishes granted in a way. And I still can't decide how I feel about the way that that is handled
By Laurie?
Well, I know how I feel about Laurie because I am not impressed at all with his like. He's just shaming her for enjoying herself and being dressed a certain way, which, like, dude, no, shut up.
And then he marries Amy.
Right, you know, yeah. But I do appreciate that she sort of realizes, like, how unnatural it feels. Like, at first she's like, you know what? I am really pretty. And look at this dress and all of this. And as the night progresses, she's like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. This is drawing a different class of people than I used to be, like, surrounded by. And I don't like them. Yeah. And overall, just there is so much baggage that comes along with living a certain way and being of a certain class that she hadn't really thought about, that she winds up sort of realizing, like, this isn't for me, actually. I get jealous of her beautiful stuff, and I still am. And I would love this big house and lots of servants, in theory. But, like, it's just, I have absorbed more of the values that my parents tried to instill in me than I thought I did. And that this doesn't hold the same sort of fascination after I've gotten to spend 2 weeks here. Like, she's so relieved to go home and have the simplicity of home again. And in that sense, I'm sort of like, I kind of like that, you know? But yeah, the way that Laurie handles it and the shame that she feels around it really bums me out.
Doesn't, I don't know if I'm remembering it correctly, but doesn't she overhear some of the adults basically pitying her?
They're essentially like assuming that she and her mother are both trying to have her like go after Laurie.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, they're like, she's so beautiful. If only her family had the means. And I'm sure that that's like the goal that she has and her mother has with their quote friendship with Laurie. There's no purity in that, in what they see. They think it's like this mercenary sort of, I'm going after someone with money. And she just finds that like really deeply insulting. And also it never even occurred to her people would think that. So she starts to worry about everyone thinking that and begins to sort of put Laurie off and hang out with him less because of the impression that gives, which is a shame. I'm sorry, there's so many comments in the side here. Guys, by the way, because the chat can be kind of hard to keep track of. If you have a direct question to ask, for those listening, we're doing this live on Crowdcast, go to the Ask a Question at the bottom and type in a specific thing, and that will pop up for me so I'll know that there's something in particular that you want us to mention. But Kathy says, Meg does bust her ass in her job, which I respected. I do love the party at the Moffats chapter. Alcott does have an issue with the restrictive clothing of the time. There's a similar segment in her book, 8 Cousins, when the fashionable aunts dress up Rose in a rather ridiculous outfit that is portrayed as such. It's true about Meg busting her ass, and like, she doesn't enjoy her job, and the children that she is a governess for are kind of terrible. But she's also, like, proud of the fact that she's doing what she can for her family with what she has. But her whole thing with marrying John, I think, is supposed to redeem the fact that she's so obsessed with things being beautiful and rich and fine because she marries a poor man despite wanting all of those things.
Yeah.
I don't know if that works or not. You know what I mean?
Not when she spends all of his money so that she can buy a fancy dress.
She takes it back. She tries to fix it, Jaime.
Does she take it back?
Yeah, she bought the silk because she doesn't buy the dress. She buys the silk for the dress. And she is sitting on it, kind of knowing that John's going to be really pissed. And then when he asks to see her like account book, which she's usually pretty proud to show him because she's very frugal, she gets all flipped out and is like, you're going to hate this. And she shows him the silk, which cost a fortune. And he's like kind of horrified. And she says that she's tired of being poor and really hurts him badly.
Right.
And then immediately regrets it because she sees the look on his face and realizes what she said and how hard he works. And is just like, I can't even believe those words came out of my mouth. I'm so sorry. And she takes the silk to Sally and convinces Sally to buy it from her.
Oh, right.
And she uses the money that Sally paid to buy John a new coat. And then tells him, how do you like my new dress? And comes out in this coat that she got for him. So it's, you know, she has learned her lesson and all is forgiven is supposed to be this moment. But really, I'm so tired of being poor is just something that you can't take back. Like, that is such a brutal moment to me. That as much as she does do her best to fix it, I'm sure that took a while for John to get past. And I'm not sure if I were him that I'd ever really get past it. You know, I feel like that would be in my head forever, just kind of echoing in the background while I tried to make my fortune in the world to like please my wife who's not happy, you know?
Yeah, I'm going to admit that all the chapters about them, like especially once they had the babies, I kind of skimmed through. I didn't really read them very closely.
Yeah, there's the one chapter that I find, and again, when I say like, because I love this book, but a lot of it I do have sort of unsettled feelings about. Like, as my understanding about gender and the division of labor begins to expand, the way that certain things are portrayed, I have a very different like feel for than I used to. And it's the story about her and John and the way that she like becomes obsessed with taking care of the babies and doesn't want to accept any help from him, doesn't want to go out and like enjoy herself anymore, and resents anybody like taking her away from them or demanding time of her. I like in some ways because her mother's like, you need to let John help you. You're being a bit of a control freak and you need to like still live your life and be a person outside of your children. This is very unhealthy for you. At the same time, the issue that most women have when they like step into this role for the first time in their lives is that men do not expect to have to help. So this thing of like, well, John would love to help you and you're not letting him does feel disingenuous to me. You know what I mean? I don't know, though. Maybe that was more of a thing. I don't know how things were. I'm always surprised by, like, how much customs have changed over time. So there may have been more of an expectation of the father being involved with, like, raising children than there is now in a lot of ways. I don't know. You know what I mean?
I don't know either, because anything else I've read, I don't know if there was young children involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, you read Jane Austen and the fathers are involved, but it's because they're trying to get, good matches for their daughters.
Right. Yeah. All right. So kind of covered Amy and Meg. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about Beth or Joe?
Well, Beth is going to be a little bit shorter, right?
That was harsh, Jamie.
Not just because she died. I read something about how, like, somebody really looked into the history of this book, the time period, and tried to figure out exactly what was going on with Beth. Mm-hmm. Because she gets scarlet fever, which, fine. Like, I expected. I knew Beth died. Mm-hmm. I think anybody, even if they've never seen an adaptation of this or read the book, knows that Beth dies. It's just one of those things that's out there. Mm-hmm. I thought she died with scarlet fever, and I was really surprised that she recovered. And she lived for, like, several years after that, and then just sort of fades away. Mm-hmm. One of the theories is that she was anorexic, like severely depressed and anorexic.
Interesting. Depression lines up to me with a lot of, like, she's really praised for being as, like, mild and gentle as she is, but it does feel to me like a bummer a lot of the time rather than something to be praised or admired.
Yeah.
And she's really meant to be, like, the conscience of the family and to embody everything in the purest form that their parents are trying to instill in them. So in some ways I enjoy her because of the way that, like, it turns out, for example, that she has all of these little friends, even though she's super horribly shy, that she has made all around town because she's the one that goes out and does errands, and she's the one that, like, interacts with, like, shopkeepers and things. So when she gets ill, all of these people are inquiring after her and, like, sending things to the house. And it's really surprising. Like, her family felt like they knew her pretty well. And it turns out she has this whole other, like, thing going on that they didn't know about because they take her so for granted.
Yeah.
That they don't pay attention. And in that, I sort of liked that because I do feel like in a family this size, there does tend to be somebody like that does a lot of the, like, majority of small tasks that don't get appreciated or noticed. They're just done. Mm-hmm. And we're all just like, oh, okay, somebody fixed the table. Like, not really putting any thought into the fact that somebody is doing that every time. And so for that, I like what she represents, but I get really frustrated at this sort of, like, the admiration of her being as meek as she is, being presented as, like, an ideal.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be.
There was a, like, feminist analysis of this book done in the 70s, I think. And that author sort of pointed out that Beth is this, like, typical feminism ideal. She wants to be at home. She wants, to take care of everybody. And she dies young. Mm-hmm. Where Jo, who wants to go out and live her life and not be restrained by any kind of confines, gets to live a long and happy life. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's something to that Alcott knew what she was doing with this character. She's just so, like, oh, everything should be nice and warm, and, I want to stay at home. I don't need to go to school, and I just want to play piano, and then she just dies.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, Louisa May Alcott had a little sister.
Yeah.
Whom this, like, Beth is based on. So, and, she supposedly was in many ways similar to Beth in that she was really like selfless and died really young. So part of that is just
scarlet fever, I think.
Did she? I wasn't like, I thought it was an illness, but I wasn't sure. I'm trying to find I forgot. So remember I was saying, cause I'm looking at her, Wikipedia, because I know that they mention who her sister is, who Beth is based on. Mm-hmm. But I just ran across that quote. I am more than half persuaded that I am a man's soul put by some freak of nature into a woman's body. And said something at another point of, I have never met a man that I have fallen in love with, though I have fallen in love with many a young girl. And so I really think that there's something going on there. And I just wish so much that she had been in an era where she could fucking have like explored that, because it just must have been excruciating.
Kathy left a comment earlier saying that PBS had an American Masters episode on her that was really good.
I want to check that out too.
Yeah.
I just don't know what, like, I just find her so interesting.
Yeah.
And this book being such a, in some ways, beautiful representation of a family, but also being something that, like, was filled with things that she didn't necessarily agree with is compelling somehow to me, you know?
It makes me sad that this was her most successful thing, and she really kind of hated it.
I'm not sure if I agree that she hated it. I feel like it was...
She felt it didn't represent her.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like when a band does a cover song for fun, and then their label releases that as their single, and everybody thinks that all of their stuff is going to be like that specific song. And they're like, no, that was a cover of someone else's song. And this is what we really like. It's like, it's not, I can do it, but it doesn't mean it's what I'm good at.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk about Joe then. Cause Beth, like you said, it's pretty short. Joe is much more interested in being independent. She has a much more like, you know, American spirit in that sort of sense. And has a really bad temper that she has to work really hard to quench, because there are a few moments where there's the famous thing where Amy burns her book and she ignores Amy, and Amy almost dies because Joe is so interested in leaving her and going on with her day and not looking back or acknowledging her sister at all.
Well, she goes ice skating with Lori, and Amy wants to go, and Joe's just ignoring her until she falls through the ice.
And I always got mad about that because it felt like this terrible accident that happened overshadowed the fact that what Amy did really was like so horribly unforgivable. Like, I could not get past that she did that, really, ever. And
wasn't it all because she wasn't invited to go with them to the theater?
Yeah, it was like such a small, petty thing that pushed her to do something like destroy somebody's work of months of labor. I mean, it's basically like somebody getting mad that you didn't take them to dinner and then going into your computer and deleting half your hard drive.
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't forgive that. And her falling through the ice and making Joe suddenly realize, like, what if she died is all well and good. But I never really felt like Amy understood the full gravity of what she did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I get really mad about that still.
She just gets forgiven because she, again, did something stupid and almost died.
Yeah, because she wasn't invited to the theater through this fit, and then follows Joe and Lori to ice skate, even though she's not invited to that either. So this is all just because Amy doesn't want to be left out of things. But, you know, I think at one point Joe says, I should think you would be ashamed to try and put yourself where you're not wanted. And I'm like, yeah, Amy, how is this fun for you to tag along to stuff when you know they don't want you there?
Well, I think the theater was because she felt like she deserved to go. Like, they get to go and do this fancy thing, and why am I not going? I'm the one who should be there, not you. So she resents that. That's why she lashed out at Joe and not at Meg. Because she could understand Meg being invited to the theater, but not Joe.
Yeah.
And Joe was mean to her.
I mean, but she was. It's the two of them just bring out the worst in each other over and over again. You know.
But falling through the ice, in the miniseries, Laurie says he invited her before she burned Joe's book. But I don't remember that being the case in the book. I think she just follows them. Yeah,
she does. She's watching them, and she's watching Joe get her skates. And she says to Meg, she told me that the next time she went skating, I could go because this is the last ice we're going to have this winter. And she's being so mean that I don't want to ask her. And Meg says, well, I'm sure if you follow her and try and be nice to her that she'll relent. So why don't you follow after her and just try and be good? And Amy's like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to go and like try and basically bully her into like accepting that I'm here. And I side-eye Meg for that as well, because Meg indulges Amy way too much. Mm-hmm. The limes being the other thing that she does, letting Amy buy all of the limes that are not allowed at school, although Meg doesn't realize they're not allowed when she gives Amy all of the money to buy them.
No, I love a lime. What are they pickled in? Because that sounds terrible.
I know, right? And I looked this up, and all I could find was vinegar. And I'm just like, yeah. And I just don't understand.
I also love vinegar. Maybe I would like this.
I mean, they suck on them. It's not even like we're going to put slices of pickled lime into something, which I could even sort of think maybe that would work with certain dishes. They just take them and suck on them. Mm-hmm. Just straight up, which is the most repulsive thing. Like, they must just be soft and dripping and squashy, and here are people just going...
Why was this the fashion?
I don't know.
Like, of all things, I really need to know more about the pickled limes. We were doing an episode of The Punisher, and there was something about fermented rice and how it helps with hangovers. Mm. And I was like, ooh, why does that sound so good? What the hell is it fermented in? Why do I want to try it? And I was really fascinated by it and then completely forgot all about it.
Is that natto?
I don't know.
I'm checking this out. What is
It's
natto?
Vietnamese.
Traditional Japanese food made from soybeans fermented. Okay, never mind. Natto's soybeans. Yeah, I don't think that I've ever tried, because I've tried natto and it's strong. I actually liked it, but I've never tried fermented rice. Because I would just think of that as being like liquor, basically, you know?
Apparently it helps with hangovers.
Huh. Interesting. So what goes on with Joe, and this is something that I actually really like. She befriends Laurie, and Laurie does that thing where he decides that he's in love with her, even though she makes it repeatedly clear that she does not feel that way about him. Mm-hmm. For so long, this goes on in these books, her just being like pouring cold water over him every time he tries to be sentimental or hint at anything or look at her a certain way. And she's just like, nope, no. And he won't have it. And Alcott has said that everybody expected Laurie and Joe to get together in the end. Mm-hmm. And she was so irritated by that she just purposely made sure that Joe wound up with somebody else, because she just got like frustrated by how much was going on with these girls and everyone only wanting to know who they married. And that was all that mattered to them in the end.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's like, they're people. Who they marry is totally secondary to everything else that's going on in these books. But okay. So the fact that they don't end up together, I remember as a young girl just being like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. They're supposed to be together. Look at how great they are. They like each other so much. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh, that is such a great bit of like writing there, that she just was like, no, they would kill each other. We're not doing this.
Yeah. It's not something that's done very often, especially at that time in literature, mm-hmm. that you have these two characters that they have their meet cute or whatever, or they don't like each other at first, like Pride and Prejudice.
Right.
And then they grow to love each other. So here we have Laurie, who is a sad, lonely boy who is befriended by these wonderful girls next door. And he and Jo just have such a bond. They get along so well. They argue, but they get along so well that of course they're going to end up together. And I fell for it knowing that they don't. Like reading through it, I'm like, well, they're going to end up together. Like, wait, no, he marries Amy. Wait, how does that work? Like, I was so confused reading because I'm like, yeah, they fight, but they also really get each other. And it's unusual to have a book at that time, written at that time, where they're like, well, they're very suited as friends. And here now he's like, hey, I married your sister. I'll love you forever. But now that's changed. It's I will love you as a sister. And I realize now that that's what it always was.
Yeah, it's a really, I'm not sure how intentional, but like we talk about being friend zoned, with that, like, guys, you girlfriend zoned me. You saw me as only being worth a love interest to you. And if you couldn't have me in that respect, you didn't want to have me in your life at all, which is really gross and reduces me to only being like a factor in your love life and not an actual person on my own.
Right.
And I really feel like Alcott nailed that a little bit and was just like, the fact that they don't wind up married does not diminish their importance to each other or how good they are together. They can still get along amazingly, spend a ton of time together, and not be romantically involved. And it's totally valid and really valuable. And I really like that because it's so rare to see things handled this way in books that are especially geared towards young girls, I feel like. And I appreciate how she handles his heartbreak with this, because despite her telling him over and over again that she's not interested in any manner of every way that she could, he still like pushes it and is like, we have to have the conversation. We have to do it. Cause she's like, oh my God, please don't. I can tell what you're about to say. Can you just not? And he's like, I can't not. No, we have to. And then runs away to Europe and is like this really self-pitying, self-indulged rich boy. And when Amy sort of slaps him and is just like, can you stop with this? It's ugly and pathetic. He then tries to like resuscitate his feelings for Jo and cling to them even as they are changing and settling into something that's much more comfortable and friendly. But he is like, feels like he's like, this indicates that he's fickle or that his feelings for her aren't actually real, and like judges himself for the fact that his feelings towards her are changing. And I really love her description of it, that like, this is one of my favorite parts of the book. So I'm just going to read this little bit because the chapter, it's in part 2, Learning to Forget. Amy's lecture did Laurie good, though of course he did not own it till long afterward. Men seldom do, for when women are the advisers, the lords of creation don't take the advice till they have persuaded themselves that it is just what they intended to do. Then they act upon it, and if it succeeds, they give the weaker vessel half the credit of it. If it fails, they generously give her the whole. And he's like thinking to himself about all of these things that he forgot to compose because he's thinking that he's going to write this like requiem. While he sat musing pen in hand or roamed about the gay city to get some new ideas and refresh his mind. He did not do much, but he thought a great deal and was conscious of a change of some sort going on in spite of himself. It's genius simmering, perhaps. I'll let it simmer and see what comes of it, he said, with a secret suspicion all the while that it wasn't genius, but something far more common. Whatever it was, it simmered to some purpose, for he grew more and more discontented with his desultory life, began to long for some real and earnest work to go at, soul and body, and finally came to the wise conclusion that everyone who loved music was not a composer. And Laurie thought that the task of forgetting his love for Joe would absorb all his power for years. But to his great surprise, he discovered it grew easier every day. He refused to believe it at first, got angry with himself and couldn't understand it. But these hearts of ours are curious and contrary things, and time and nature will work in spite of us. Laurie's heart wouldn't ache. The wound persisted in healing with a rapidity that astonished him, and instead of trying to forget, he found himself trying to remember. He had not foreseen this turn of affairs and was not prepared for it. He was disgusted with himself, surprised at his own fickleness, and full of a queer mixture of disappointment and relief that he could recover from such a tremendous blow so soon. He carefully stirred up the embers of his lost love, but they refused to burst into a blaze. There was only a comfortable glow that warmed and did him good without putting him into a fever, and he was reluctantly obliged to confess that the boyish passion was slowly subsiding into a more tranquil sentiment, very tender, a little sad and resentful still, but that was sure to pass away in time, leaving a brotherly affection which would last unbroken to the end. I just love that. It's weird to me that he doesn't get much of a point of view section in the whole book until that moment, and how beautifully she writes this, like, petulant, like, selfish boy, you know? Because have you ever had that where, like, you have a breakup and you're like, well, obviously this is a calamity and I need, like, this is going to take forever, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, actually, maybe it's fine. Maybe that guy was an asshole, and you start to come around on it, like, way more quickly than you ever thought. Yeah. It's like, not that he thinks that she's an asshole, but just realizing that he misjudged because he only has one understanding of what it is to have a friendly relationship with a woman. Mm-hmm. You know? If he feels like he cares about a woman, that it must mean that they're destined to be married, and that's all there is to it.
And I think that's also pretty human. We all do it. Mm-hmm. At some point in our lives. It's not just guys. Guys are guilty of the, well, if I feel this strongly for you, then you must have to be my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. There's no way we can just be friends. Yeah. But I think we've all, like, been infatuated with somebody, think that it's more than just infatuation, and can't even conceive of getting over that person. And then when you do get over them, you're like, wait, does that mean that I didn't love that person? Yeah. Yeah. Because I thought I did.
You can really think that. Like, I've had that a couple of times where I would have sworn up and down that this was, like, you know, going to last forever and to the end. Mm-hmm. And I look back now and it was such a thin, nothing thing, you know, and I just hadn't the understanding or capacity to know that yet.
I've also been in the situation where I was on and off with this guy, and I just was convinced, like, I'm in love with him. We are so well suited for each other. It makes no sense whatsoever that we're not together. And if he could just see it, because he really liked making out with me, and he really loved spending time with me. But for the most part, he would always kind of push me away because he was like, I love you, but not like that. Mm-hmm. And he was very clear about it. And I was like, he's wrong.
Right. He'll come around.
And he will see. Right. Because we spend every day together, and he will see. And you know what? He never did. And he was right, because we were very well suited as friends. And I was an idiot, and I allowed myself to just get hurt over and over again because I was so stubborn. And he was very honest with me. And I resented him for that for a long time. Like, how could he just continue to hurt me over and over again until I got a little bit outside of the situation and was like, oh, no. I let myself just get beaten up emotionally because I was so convinced that we were supposed to be together.
And didn't hear him at all, which
absolutely
Laurie does not do.
Refused to hear him. I thought that he was lying. That he was just too scared to admit that what we had was right. Mm-hmm.
And that's clearly what Laurie thinks. And it's understandable that he would feel that way, because in a lot of ways, Joe is very shut up and cut off from that part of herself. So he sees that and interprets it as her pushing him away because she is afraid. And he doesn't seem to understand that, like, she is afraid, but not of you. And it's going to take an actual care for someone in that respect to open that part of her up.
Yeah, I kind of resent that a book about women, I relate more to the boy. Personally, like,
interesting.
I'm not like any of those girls in any way, but I can see myself in Lori in a lot of ways. So I relate to him.
Yeah, I can understand that. I really, like I said, I relate so much to Amy and her, like, trying to overcome her selfishness and her obsession with, like, beauty. And just wanting so much for things to just be beautiful. And you need money for that to happen. Like, so in that respect, I'm just like, oh, girl, I get you. Like, she and I would really do well together in that sense. But I relate just as much, if not more, to Jo and her battles with her temper. Because my temper, y'all don't know. Like, she expresses to Marmee at one point how she is worried that she is going to do something when she flies into a rage at some point that will ruin her life and make people hate her forever, and she will not be able to take it back. And I totally get that. Like, I have had moments where I have almost done things that I look back and I'm like, I came so close to that. I can't believe how close I came. And it wasn't like murder or anything, but it would have hurt somebody so terribly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I am only barely beginning to get a hold of it. I mean, I think back to some of the things that I said to Brendan when we were in fights and stuff. And I'm just like, I can't believe I didn't even think I was being cruel. I thought I was just being honest and straightforward. But of course, when you're angry, you let things get a little
nasty,
more than honest, and like just hurtful. And again, when you say something, you can't take that back ever. And her constantly having to, like, when I first read this book, I actually really resented her mother's, like, advice on keeping her temper, because I felt like it was, in this era, women are not allowed to be angry or anything but totally agreeable all the time. And how unfair is it that she is expected to constantly, like, be in total self-control of herself when she has perfectly valid reasons to be angry. And this is just, like, flat out sexism. And there's certainly part of it is this expectation for women to be, like, what's the word, docile. And that's something that I don't appreciate or agree with.
Compliant.
Yeah. But as I've gotten older and started to see the, like, consequences of really flying off the handle a little bit more clearly, I appreciate this piece of the story a lot more, because Jo has some foresight in understanding how bad it could wind up for her if she doesn't get this handled that I did not have at her age. Like, she really sees this is a problem that I need to work on because I don't know what I'm capable of and I don't want to find out, you know?
That's after the thing with Amy, right? Before Amy falls through the ice, but after Amy burns. In the miniseries, she slaps Amy. Does she slap her in the book? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she does. And her Meg and her mother, like, step in, I think, and separate the two of them. And that's part of why I resented it so much, was because, in my opinion, what Amy did was unforgivable and Jo had every right to flip out the way that she did. And I found it really gross that everyone was just like, well, just forgive her. She almost died. Who cares? That's not relevant, you know?
Right.
But I can separate this particular incident from her needing to overall work on that, like, defective character much better this time around than I was able to the first time.
I actually really like that her mother was like, no, I'm angry all the time. Mm-hmm. All the time.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine that any woman at this time who, I'm not going to say was intelligent enough to want more, but was aware that there were injustices, that women were, you know, expected of different things and maybe wanted something more, would be angry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, and with Marmee, she grew up even earlier, So for her to want more, know that she can't have more, that would certainly make me angry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the fact that she's like, I'm angry all the time, and your father had to basically talk to me about it. Like, you need to find a way to not, like, flip out every time you're upset about something. I really appreciated that, because he's not saying you're wrong for being this way. He's just saying there's a time and a place, and you can't just be yelling at people everywhere you go. And if you get mad at me when we're out, you have to find a way to address that and not yell at me when we're out. So,
yeah, I think that I misunderstood it when I read it when I was younger as being suppress your anger forever. Never show that you're upset. And like you said, it's really more about managing it and figuring out the correct time and place to, and I have like sort of learned to do that a little bit with like dealing with because more people listen to the show now than ever, and I will get more like comments or emails that make me so mad that make me just want to fly back and like write back, you fucking moron, how dare. And I have learned to sit on that and breathe, and it'll sometimes take a full damn day for me to be able to even formulate a paragraph that doesn't contain cursing and insults. But I'm figuring it out. It's a learning process.
Yeah, I don't have a temper. I get mad, but I internalize it and like simmer. I also, suffer from tons of self-doubt. So when I get angry, then I'm like, well, why would they act that way? Why would they think that about me? What did I do? I've never been one that like, it takes so much to get me to actually raise my voice. If I get to that point, because usually when I'm super mad, I am silent. I will not talk to you. You don't exist anymore. I'm done. If I have to yell, that's like a volcano. Like, it doesn't feel natural to me, because to get to that point takes so much. I just don't have a temper at all.
Yeah, I now that is my thing, is that I go silent, because that's the only way I have learned to keep a lid on it. I have to not talk, because if I am allowed to like discuss it right away, I can't help but yell. The symptoms of our anger are the same, but they come from very different places. That's interesting.
Like, I can get mad quick, but the way, like, nothing like sets me off. I'll get mad and I'll snap at people, and that tends to be my thing. And I've been criticized about it because I'm quick to snapping and saying something kind of vicious. But I don't know. Maybe that's a little temper. My mother has a temper, and when I think about somebody with a temper, I'm like, well, I'm not like her.
Right.
She will go from 0 to 100 in a second, and I'm like, I didn't say anything. I didn't raise my voice, Mom. Why are you yelling at me?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I often, like, I can be weirdly patient about certain things. I'm like, I have no patience in the respect of, like, people not doing things for themselves or trying to find things out before, like, putting it to somebody else to figure it out for them. Anything that basically feels like, how are you this lazy? I have, like, very little patience for. But, like, if I'm in a grocery line and the checkout is really slow, I'm the person who's just like, whatever, it's fine. I don't know. I'm on my phone. Like, I don't get mad about that kind of thing at all.
I can't stand waiting in a line.
Yeah, see, like, and that my mother's like that. She will flip out when she's like driving and somebody's too slow in front of her, and I'm the one in the like passenger side going, we don't need to get there 5 minutes earlier than we're gonna get there. It's gonna be fine. We're going to the mall. Who cares? You know. Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, Jo works on that, and she like mostly does pretty well managing that until what happens when Amy gets older. They go out calling. Jo does her couple of little like pranks where Amy's like, be cool and reserved and ladylike here. And she takes it to this ridiculous extreme to provoke Amy and is so like haughty and distant that everybody's just like, what the fuck is her problem? The next place they go, Amy's like, why can't you just be like the other girls are and gossip and enjoy yourself? So she basically imitates this other girl that everyone knows, and they are all quite aware of who she's imitating. And it gets back to that girl. And that's what winds up like biting Amy in the ass, is Joe being kind of a dick. So finally, when they go to the marches, Aunt March's, she is in a temper because she hasn't really been allowed to like be herself. They went to one house where she did get to be herself, and it wound up like sort of ruining her dress and her hat, and she just kind of looks like a mess. So she's cranky. And this is really like a nice illustration of how you let yourself slip once because you're in a bad mood, and it can just have this like long-lasting impact that you never saw coming. She responds to these little suggestions that her aunt makes about, like, you know, accepting favors from people with, I don't like favors, I find them oppressive. I would rather only rely on myself and be perfectly independent. And I never learned French. It's such a stupid, slippery language. Who cares anyway? And just basically like snaps about everything and has no idea that Aunt March and her friend are judging which of these two to send to Europe. And Europe is like the dearest wish of Joe's heart for her whole life. And she has no idea that that's what's at stake here. So Amy, being concerned about pleasing her aunt and being polite and being interested and paying respect, comes across so well that there's simply no question. And Joe, later on, when her aunt writes to tell them that I'm taking Amy, at first is like, what the fuck? I've been her companion this whole time. How can she take Amy? And her mom's like, she wrote some things as if quoting you, and reads them back to Joe. And Joe is like, oh God, I did say all of that. I can't believe I just ruined this for myself. Relatable. I don't know how many of you are aware that I was fired from my last job because of things that I posted on social media without thinking it through. But so many people were like, that's not right. That's not fair. It shouldn't have any bearing. And I couldn't even like really defend myself. I was just like, no, I knew that I wasn't supposed to. And I just like went and put it out there like without thinking. This is totally on me. But there's no taking it back. And what's done is done. And it's such a bummer because you have nobody to blame but yourself.
Well,
as
that's
much
the
as
worst
everybody
thing.
wants to, like, you know,
Yeah. When something bad happens and you know that you can look back and see all the ways that you caused this to happen.
Yep.
God, it sucks.
Yeah. So I really felt for her because Joe never winds up going to Europe, at least in the books that I have read. And it's just such a cliche in stories like this that somebody has something that they have wanted since they were a child, and eventually they get it. You work hard enough, you get it. And for that to not be the case here, and for her life to go in such a different direction than everything that she had ever wanted, really bummed me out.
Yeah.
You know? It just felt like so unjust. And I understand better now that, like, you know, sometimes what you wanted at one time, you look back and realize, like, that wouldn't have been good for me at that time, or right for me, or whatever. But I don't know that it wouldn't have been right for her. I feel like Europe would have agreed with her pretty well.
Probably.
Know?
Not in the same way it did for Amy, but
no.
I think she would have learned, and it would have improved her writing and her ability to have confidence in herself and to do what she wants to do. And instead she ends up, I mean, Aunt March leaves her house.
Yeah.
So she gets this house that she doesn't have to worry about. But she starts a school for boys.
Yeah. I get real annoyed by this.
That really bothered me. Like, you're a girl who wants the world to be different for girls.
Mm-hmm.
You've resented your whole life that you were not born a boy because the opportunities for girls are not the same as they are for boys. And so you start a school for boys?
Yep, I know. I got real mad about that. That's like, that for me was like a real sour note to end the book on. And in some ways, I feel like it really betrays something about Alcott, because I think that she just did not feel at ease around women or at ease with the expectations of women. Mm-hmm. That for her, the idea of raising girls to be things that she did not agree with or value was just something that did not interest her and felt like a betrayal. So surrounding herself with boys with whom which she felt like an affinity that was never really reconciled makes sense, but it's a really selfish outlook. And it's about her personal comfort and enjoyment of like boyish things versus doing something good for the world in general and women in particular.
Yeah.
And I have a really hard time with the fact that that's what she decides. And the way it's worded and everything. A wilderness of boys. Like how... I guess.
We'll start with the rich boys, but then we'll pick up a ragamuffin every year or so.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it even begins with, I want to have a place where these kids who are underprivileged and could use an education can get one. And Laurie's like, well, that's going to cost a lot of money, and how are you going to pay for all these kids? And she's like, well, I guess I'll start with rich kids and eventually teach the poor kids. Like, the whole thing, I'm just like, I wish I hadn't read this chapter.
Yeah, I feel like I understand that, because the house was left to her, but the care of it is something that she would still have to pay for.
Sure,
so
I get
like
it.
That's just a practicality, but it doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
That she's just like, well, let me open a school for rich boys, and
How
that'll
about
be
you
my
open
first
a
step.
School where the teachers don't force children to stand in the front of the class in punishment because they brought in some limes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
Yeah.
a co-ed school for all kids, not just boy kids.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Being a girl who felt like she was excluded from things because of her gender.
I don't feel like she could have done a co-ed school, because what she's doing is a boarding school.
Oh, is it?
And nobody would allow that.
Fine.
But yeah, she could have just done a girls' school, and it really would have felt appropriate to the end of a book called Little Women.
When I found out that the sequel to this is called Joe's Boys, well, there's Little Men, and then there's Joe's Boys, and like, fine.
Joe's Boys was a weird one too. I don't remember Little Men, although I know I read it, but yeah, I had a lot of mixed feelings about Joe's Boys as well. Yeah, and okay, so I want to talk about Friedrich Baer, because as you were talking about earlier, he sort of like discourages Jo from writing what she is making money off of, because he says that it is kind of toxic, is basically, you know, in so many words, that she's writing, and he doesn't acknowledge that he knows she's writing it.
Yeah, he just talks about it in general.
Yeah, because in the adaptations I've seen, he's sort of confrontational about it. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, you can do so much better than this. Which, you can do better than this, is a really different message than this is trash and poison to young minds. Which, that feels really out of proportion. Mm-hmm. She's not writing instructionals on how to murder and poison people.
She's just writing little adventures.
Yeah, you know, wild stories, sure.
Yeah.
But
sometimes there's like crazy aspects to it, like, I don't know, she never really goes into detail of what she's writing, but she talks about what she's researched. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, she gets into some pretty, at the time, dark research, like into things that aren't, you know, I'm guessing like witches and whatever.
Yeah, and it said something like she excited the suspicion of librarians by asking for books on poisonings, things like this, which I really like. I like that idea. But yeah, it just really bothered me that because we don't really get a distinctive understanding of what she's writing specifically, it doesn't feel fair at all the way that, like, because Alcott also writes it as everything that she is reading and the people that she's studying as characters are a sort of like stand-in for actual friends that are bad company to keep and dangerous for her. And I just don't feel that. And it just seems so puritanical and strange. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I don't know. Especially because, you know, she's poor and doing the best she can to support her family that needs it.
Yeah.
So him being like, better to sweep mud in the streets than to write this trash. And I'm just like, I have a feeling you don't get paid for sweeping the streets the way you get paid for writing a sensation story, but go off.
And also, like, who are you to tell this girl what to do with her life and what not? You haven't expressed interest in her. You're somebody who shares a boarding house, shares a dinner table sometimes. Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Yeah, so as much as I like the idea of Friedrich Baer, simply because it's Alcott's way of being like, you want her to marry the young rich man, and she's going to marry an old, poor, weird man. And I enjoy that. Mm-hmm. Baer himself, I don't really love, because I feel like he's so judgmental and comes out of nowhere with it. And is really vehement about it in a way that feels totally out of proportion to what's actually in those stories. But I do like, you know, Jo doing something even though she's conventional in that she's getting married and having kids, she's gone about it in a very unconventional way with somebody that nobody ever would have expected. And that feels like her. So
yeah. Her dad really liked him. Mm-hmm. They could talk about philosophy.
Yeah, because they're much closer in age to each other.
Well, he's supposed to be like 40-something, right? Mm-hmm. And by the time they get married, she's in her 20s. She's probably in her mid-20s. Apparently, you were considered a spinster if you were 26, so...
I mean, it's not out of... It's enough of an age difference that it's people were concerned about it, even in the book. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't, like, completely unheard of or anything.
It's not like she married Laurie's grandfather.
Oh, my God. I love when he's, like... When they're confronting the fact that Laurie wants to marry her, and he's like, "Don't tell me you love that old man." And she's like, "What old man?" And thinks that he's talking about his grandfather. Because Friedrich Baer has not even entered her mind in that respect yet.
Yeah.
I just love that moment.
I also felt like it was really convenient that all of a sudden she's like, "Oh, I can't stop thinking about the professor." Mm-hmm. Like, it's the only other single man you've met. So I guess this is where we're going.
He's the only other single man that she has put in an effort to know. Yeah. But she met plenty of single guys at the boarding house and just didn't take an interest in any of them. You know what I mean?
Did she? I don't remember.
Yeah, it was like they all were sort of
about the kids, but
there were a couple of guys that like mentioned that she seems like she's actually like sort of attractive, but she has no style and is very like haughty and withdrawn. Because she doesn't like to talk to anybody. And there's a masquerade ball, and she's wearing a mask and disguises her voice and really like kind of cuts up, and everybody is delighted with her. And when she unmasks and they realize who she is, they're all like flabbergasted because they all thought that she was just not really like likable. And it turns out that she was sort of the life of this party. It's a small thing, but like she had the opportunity to meet other boys, and she doesn't really want to.
Yeah.
She seems to view most young men as like a potential tragedy in the making. Like Meg makes Laurie promise not to drink anymore at her wedding. Do you remember that?
No.
It's really weird and I don't like it.
I know that Jo makes him stop going to play billiards. Because that leads to bad things. Mm-hmm. Only bad people go play billiards, and
the billiards really are in a saloon.
What?
the billiards are in a saloon.
Okay.
So she doesn't want him going to saloons because she feels like that's bad company there.
Okay.
Yeah. But similarly, yeah, Meg, like, he is asking at her wedding, didn't grandfather send over some bottles? Like, you know, they expected to have wine or champagne for her wedding. And it turns out like they did. And so did Aunt March, but they've put them away to only be taken out during illness because they don't believe that alcohol is something that you should just drink for fun. And she then is like, and I really think that it's important. Like she says something like, my mother always said that I shouldn't, young women shouldn't serve it to young men, and expects Laurie to be like mad about it. And instead he's like, you know what? I like that. I wish more women thought that way. To which I'm like, can we not be responsible for your behavior? You're perfectly free to not drink without us refusing it for like on your behalf.
No, Natasha.
And then she says, promise me not to do it again and give me another reason to call this the happiest day of my life.
Barf.
And puts him on the spot at her wedding to make a promise for the rest of his life that he will never drink. Which is bananas to me.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, that must have something to do with the time that this was written, that I'd like to look into, like, not necessarily the history of alcohol, but why, like, was that opinion coming through her because of how she was raised, because of her weirdo father?
Yes.
Or was it
Alcott,
normal?
this was part of the like living off the land thing, alcohol and caffeine. It was sort of like, you know, this was the 1860s version of being like a Goop fan. Do you know what I mean? Of just like subscribing to really radical ideas of what is healthy and good for your body, and being very puritanical about it in a way that, in my opinion, is another manifestation of an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And, so her family was whole part of the temperance movement. And that's part of, like, that just comes through so many more times in the second half of this book. And I just really was like, it's just so extreme. Yeah. You know, I just have a reaction to any sort of extremism like that. And the fact that she puts him on the spot like that at her wedding feels so manipulative. Like, I don't know. And he like agrees, and it's followed up by a sentence of like, and he had many an occasion to thank her afterwards for making him make that promise. And I'm just like, can he just take responsibility for his own shit and not, you know, like, but no. So yeah, that, there are a lot of instances in this. Also at her wedding, first kiss for Marmee.
Yeah.
What the fuck was that? I don't understand that one at all. Like, I understand that this is supposed to be sort of a non-traditional wedding, but that is just sort of creepy. Mm-hmm. You know?
It's not like Marmee convinced her that she loved John either. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, that she was... Even still, I wouldn't be able to understand that sentiment of first kiss for Marmee, but if... You know, Meg had been like, oh my gosh, no, ugh, him, no, God. And then Marmee, like, convinced her somehow, like, I think you like him more than you realize you do. And then she realizes it, and then she's like, oh, thank you, Marmee, for making me see the light. But no, she realized it on her own because Aunt March was such a snob.
I love that scene, actually. Yeah. Aunt March just poking and prodding at her, and then being like, well, fine, I'm not leaving you anything in my will. And afterwards just being like, shit, I need to give her something, though. And then just winds up saddling her with, like, enough linens to last her for the rest of her life, but pretending that they're from someone else. I really like Aunt March. She's so... The parts where Amy is, where Beth is sick with scarlet fever and Amy gets sent to live with Aunt March, and her dealing with that parrot.
Yeah.
I love that fucking parrot. I wish so much that he was like there. He's not in any of them, and come and take a walk, my dear.
Watch the miniseries. He doesn't talk like he does in the book, but there's a really great scene when Amy first goes there, where the parrot is sitting on her shoulder and just like gnawing on this bow on her head, and the actress. I feel like this was the actress saying, "Can I take the parrot off now, Aunt March?" Because this thing is this giant parrot on her shoulder, just like biting at this bow on her head, and she's acting through it. But I was just like, man, it's pretty good.
I love that. And that's like one of the first moments where Amy starts to reform a little bit, because she realizes like so many people will be really sad if something happens to Beth, because she's kind and cares about people, and nobody's going to care if I die. Like, there'll be some people who are sad, but it won't be the same.
So she writes this will where Laurie's like, this is just you apologizing for a bunch of stuff.
She gives stuff away?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Because, well, I don't know. Maybe it's just maybe I'm mixing it up with what he says in the movie, because I just watched it and I read that chapter so long ago. But she's like going through her list of, to Meg, I give this. To Beth, if she lives after me, I give this. And he's like, I'm not going to do this anymore. But also, like, this is just you, like, apologizing by giving away your stuff. And she's like, well, I don't want to die and have everybody hate me.
Yeah, that's not really how it goes in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a couple weeks since I read that chapter, so I couldn't remember exactly.
Yeah. It's a long book, so I get that.
Yeah.
I've been doing the audiobook, and the audiobook's like 25 hours long.
Are you doing the Christina Ricci one?
No. Oh. There are like 8 different audiobooks.
Yeah. I almost just went with audiobook, and then I was like, you know what? I read faster than I can listen to this stuff.
I listened to all of the samples. And it was like the very last one that I found. I was like, oh, okay, this one. Because most of them, I really did not care for their narration at all. And Christina Ricci, I was sort of like, that's an interesting choice. Okay, let's try it out. And I listened to the sample. I was like, no. She doesn't have the sort of like interest in her voice. It's very flat to me.
Yeah, I read the reviews of that one because I was like, oh, Christina Ricci. And then the reviews were like, she could not have cared less about what she was doing while she was reading.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to look now to see who it is. Read by Kate Reading. Her last name is Reading.
Maybe it's Reading.
Maybe. I forgot that you can say it that way. But yeah, she's quite good. I enjoy her. She does some different voices and isn't too extreme with them, but you can tell who is who. And she really delivers some of the funnier lines excellently and gets the humor across really well. It feels like she has read this book before and gets it, Yeah. Because the language can be very dense.
Yeah, that's why I thought about going with audiobook, because I thought maybe if I'm hearing it spoken to me, because a lot of times hearing something makes me understand it a bit more. Like, for instance, I read Romeo and Juliet, thought it was fine. But then when I saw the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet that was modern but with the old language, all that language completely clicked for me. When I was seeing it performed and having it in context, hearing how it's supposed to sound instead of hearing it in my own head, it just made sense. And watching the Little Women miniseries, I was like, oh, okay, I get a lot of this because it's spoken a little more plainly, which helps. But also seeing the situations would help a little bit for me too. And sometimes I just think like I'm a pretty visual person. So if I'm struggling with a story, like I said, like Jason would be like, how are you doing with that book? And I'm like, when I'm reading it, I'm enjoying it. I'm frustrated with a lot of the characters, and I'm frustrated with the way it's written, but I enjoy what I'm reading. And there's some chapters that I was just completely delighted by while I was reading it, and then surprised, like, wow, I was really enjoying myself there for a second. I did in no way hate this book. I know it sound kind of down on it, but I really did enjoy it. It's just I struggled, which I'm not used to doing. I really enjoyed the 3-part miniseries. I'm looking forward to Greta Gerwig's movie that's coming out next year.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and it's got, like, Saoirse Ronan plays Jo, and Emma Watson's playing Meg.
Huh.
I think...
Interesting. I can see that. Okay. Yeah.
Meryl Streep is either playing Marmee or she's playing Aunt March.
Oh, my God.
It's a
I
really...
want her to play Aunt March, please.
Really good cast. Timothy Chalamet is playing Laurie, of course.
Wait, who?
Timothy Chalamet.
I don't know who that is. I'm looking that up.
Did you see Lady Bird?
No.
Oh God, you should see Lady Bird. It's really good. He's also in Call Me by Your Name. He was Oscar nominated for Call Me by Your Name.
How do you spell Chalamet?
Chal. And Timothy is like Ti. It's very French.
MET. It's French. Okay, I had a whole other. Oh, this kid. Okay, yeah, no, he's familiar. Very pointy face.
She clearly loves him. She cast him in Lady Bird, and then like immediately, I think he and Saoirse Ronan. She just was like, they are playing these parts.
Huh. That'll be fun. Okay. And it's a movie?
It's a movie, so
Okay.
a lot's going to be cut out. But I'm curious and interested in her take on it, because I think Greta Gerwig is a really excellent storyteller and a really good director. And I think that she'll kind of pull stuff from this story that modern girls are going to appreciate. But I think she's keeping it in that time frame.
Huh.
Like that
looking
time
at
period.
The cast here to just double check. Yeah, Meryl Streep is Aunt March.
Who's playing Marmee?
I'm trying to find it. It's like Meg, Laurie, Jo, Amy, Aunt March, John Brooke, Beth March, Friedrich Bear, Mary March. Is Mary March Marmee?
Maybe.
I don't even know that her first name. I guess it must be Laura Dern.
Oh, Laura Dern, right.
That's fun.
Great cast.
Bob Odenkirk. Who the fuck is he going to be?
I don't know who he's playing. Maybe he's the father.
There's no name under his.
Yeah.
He's like, him and Chris Cooper are listed, but they're not actually named. Interesting. All right. Well, this will be interesting.
In the miniseries that I just watched, it was Dumbledore that played the grandfather.
Gambon?
Yeah, Gambon.
Gambon? Is that how you say his name?
Michael Gambon. Yeah, he played Grandpa Lawrence. He was very good. I know he's like questionable as Dumbledore, but I think he's a really good actor. I've seen him in other things. Well, his choices were questionable.
Yes. Agreed.
So yeah, overall, this book made me very interested to read about Louisa May Alcott. Mm-hmm. I have been meaning to read this book since I was a kid, so I'm glad I finally did.
Tell me, when you said there were chapters that I was delighted by, what was one? Give me an example of one that in particular you really liked.
Well, like I said, I really liked that chapter when Amy confronts Laurie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite satisfying. It's true.
What else?
I like the coolness of it because she tries to really be detached, and that's what makes it so effective.
Yeah.
Rather than being like heated, she's just sort of like, well, you're being very selfish, and to be frank, I despise you. It's just a sort of like disappointment that's like, ouch, girl.
I liked when they had their little Camp Lawrence, where they went out on the boat with the British friends of his.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the moments when Jo finally like masters her temper, because that guy is cheating and very clearly cheating, and everybody knows it. Oh, that made me so crazy. Made me very angry, guys.
God, I can't even. I read this a lot of times before I went to bed, so I can remember being like, "That was fun. I gotta go to sleep," and then like it just all gets put out of my head. Mm-hmm. Let me look through my book.
I'm a fan of the Pickwick paper that they write. Yeah, I found it to be kind of charming in that it was like reminding me of making secret clubs when I was a kid, and how like weird and pointless they were. They didn't do anything, you know? There was always this sort of like assumption that we would make a secret club and then eventually there would be some like mystery in our neighborhood that we would obviously solve, because that's how it goes in cartoons and children's television shows. But no mysteries arose and we were left to just like play in the mud.
Yeah.
And pretend that this was like very official, because we were in our clubhouse, which was a particular empty patch in the woods.
I played by myself a lot, so I had lots of adventures around my house because I was always pretending to be a Goonie. I was always on treasure hunts. I think
that's a valid way to spend your time.
I had she was a cousin or a great aunt that died and left me all of her costume jewelry. And so I had treasure. So I had treasure to find. And I would hide it, and then I would run around my house and find my treasure. And I had a pool,
like that.
So we had like an above ground pool, which wasn't ideal for pretending that I was, jumping off of a pirate ship or whatever. But during the summer, I was allowed to go and use the pool as my, getting to the ship.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So when I say like the book delighted me, it's not necessarily that there were chapters that were happy and fun. It was just I would realize that I'd gotten like sucked into the story, and that made me happy because I struggled with other parts. So like when Beth gets sick and with scarlet fever, and everything that they do to be mad at themselves for not taking her seriously, for making her go over there by herself instead of helping her when she does all this stuff for everybody all the time. I really liked that they recognized that, they could have avoided this since Joe and Meg had scarlet fever and would not catch it again. When Marmee has to go to their father because he's sick and Joe goes and cuts off her hair, which is just such a weird thing to me to even understand that they would use human hair to braid for what?
They would do it for wigs. They would take it for wigs.
Because it didn't sound like it was for wigs in that chapter.
I think that's like... it might be just like extensions, but I don't know how that would work. I just assumed it was wigs.
I thought so too, but then... I don't know where that is, where he's... In the miniseries, they didn't explain what he used the hair for. And also they made him black, that proprietor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. But I don't know. It sounded like the wife like wove it into something. And
that's what you do to make a wig.
Okay.
You have like and you have to weave the strands through and whatnot. And it's like incredibly time consuming.
Okay. Because they were saying that it wasn't like a becoming color.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, look, I need to do this. My father could be dying. So I really liked that. It was innovative of her. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the only thing that she could do.
Yeah.
That, and I love her going to bed and crying. And Beth being like, are you crying about father? And she says, no. My hair. And then starts crying, and it's just like, I love it. So there are like so many lovely little human moments where these girls can be so good and try so hard and be so conscious of trying to be good, and then they'll have things like that where they just really succumb to vanity and being human. And I feel like this book can really like teeter on the edge of being way too preachy, and she manages to pull back a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time. I feel like she tempers it really well with humor and real moments that feel genuine and keep it from being just irritating,
Yeah, there were moments where I was like, ugh, enough with your morality tales here. God. These four, like, ultimately perfect little girls who always come to the correct conclusion at the end of the chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, although they do seem to have to, like, learn the same lessons over and over again.
I did like the chapter where Marmee is busy and Hannah needs some time off, and so the girls are like, we'll take care of everything. Oh, no. It's that Marmy's like, go ahead. Do nothing. Mm-hmm. See how that goes. And
that is a really good chapter, yeah.
And they do nothing. And nothing gets done. And they're like, but where's my apron, my clothes, my shoes, my whatever? And she's like, well, you were the one who decided you didn't want to do anything this week.
Yep. Yeah, at first she's like, yeah, just do nothing and lays around all day. And they like have a good time the first 2 days, but Marmy and Hannah are doing their work for them. And then she's like, all right, I'm giving Hannah the day off, and I'm going to like go downtown and just hang out at the spa. And when they wake up, there's no fire made up. There's no breakfast. They don't know how to make anything because they haven't learned. And the house is like just still a mess from yesterday. There's still dust all over. And I really enjoyed I really like when she talks about how different their thoughts are than what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Like they're all trying to pretend that they're still enjoying like
doing nothing,
but they all are just sort of secretly like tired of this whole thing. Mm-hmm. And in no chapter did I relate to that more than Amy, who has this party planned that she wants to have that's very like grand and way too much for the family to really manage. But she's got her heart set on it. Mm-hmm. And the first day it rains and nobody comes. And so she has it set that if it rains the first day, then everybody's supposed to come on Tuesday. But her interest, like her cake, was growing a little stale. And she wished that she had never said anything about Tuesday. If I have not been in the position of being like, I'm going to have this grand, amazing party, and then by the time the party gets there, I'm just like, I am sick of this already. Like, I have been there I overdo it, and then I don't have fun. But I never learn. Amy and I, we just are too alike sometimes. But she won't let anybody else know how tired of everything she is.
Yeah.
Because they all warned her, and they all were kind of like, this is a little bit of a lot. Like, maybe just tone it down and be a little bit more reasonable. And she won't do it. So by the time she's, like, realizing her mistake, she can't give them the satisfaction of letting them know. Yeah.
Is that when she goes to get a lobster and somebody, like one of the townsboys, like makes fun of her or thinks that, because apparently back then lobster was not extravagant. It was for poor people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Which is crazy.
Which is sort of a weird thing that she wants lobster salad so bad for her fancy party if it's a poor person food.
Well, wasn't it a concession because it rained the first day and so like...
Oh, the chicken. They were going to have chicken. You're right.
And so she has to go out and get something, and she's like, I guess I'll have to do with lobster. And I'm like, what world is this where you have to do with lobster? Everyone I know is like, lobster?
Yeah, that was the same thing with oysters. Oysters used to be really cheap and easy to come by, and then we overfished oysters out, and now they're like a fortune.
I think that people shouldn't eat lobster because in order to get a lobster big enough to eat, it's very old. It's lived a long time, and that's just cruel.
But do you know what happens if you don't eat them?
They keep living.
They keep living until they accidentally, like, because their shells slough off and grow larger to accommodate their body. But as they get older, that's harder and harder for them to do. So eventually they, like, strangle to death inside their own shell.
Are you lying?
I am not lying. Go check it out. So, yeah, I'm fine with it. Basically, lobsters are the cockroaches of the ocean,
well,
so I really don't have feelings on it, to be honest.
One of my proudest moments, because I'm not preachy about being a vegetarian. Like, I just don't want to eat animals myself, but whatever. But my dad, I guess, like, took in some of the stuff that I had said over the years, and he got a lobster. And he looked at it, and he was like... can't eat you. And he drove out to the ocean and put it back.
Aw, that's sweet.
Yeah, and I was like, aw, Dad.
I'm totally fine with eating lobsters, but I really get disgusted when I see, like, them put in a cool pot of water and the pot slowly brought to a boil.
That's just
cruel.
Drop
them in a boiling pot and let it be over. What are you doing?
Who made this comment? Is this still Kathy? Kathy, I've had lobster one time. First of all, I hate seafood. I've had lobster one time. It was the grossest thing I've ever tasted. So
honestly, I love crab, but lobster I don't really understand people like. I find it to be not great most of the time.
I've never had crab.
Unless you're able to get it super, super fresh, which most of us cannot. It's just not really. Crab is lovely. And it's like, I think that lobster suffers from being frozen, but crab doesn't. It still has this amazing texture. But of course, what it is that you like to just dunk it in butter. So
well, you can do that with
is
lobster
it the crab?
too.
But yeah, but it's the texture of the crab being so, like, lobster can be rubbery and bouncy, and crab is not. It's super tender and lovely.
Ugh. Well, I've never liked seafood ever. Even as a little kid, like, it's just so gross to me. The smell of it is awful. I don't understand it. I'm from New England, guys. My family doesn't know how I exist because
because it's a big deal, man.
Ugh.
Fried clams,
it is a
baby. Yeah.
My mom, when she came to visit me in Rhode Island after not being there for God, it had probably been 20 years since she went back. She was like, we have to go get lobster. That woman ate lobster 5 times in 1 week because you can get just really fresh lobster right off of down at, especially in Newport where she was staying. So I was like, you are on your own with that nonsense.
When I go home to visit, or if I go home to Connecticut for my wedding like I'm planning, I'm going to be eating a lot of seafood because the seafood here in Texas, unless you're on the Gulf Coast, which I am not, is shameful. And it's really depressing.
Well, and that's the other thing. I'm glad I don't eat seafood because when I think about all of the landlocked states in this country, and you're getting questionable seafood.
Yeah.
I feel like you should... a sushi restaurant in middle America, ugh. You don't know. Ugh. That shit's raw and you're going to eat it. You don't know where it came from or how long it's... Ugh. No. You're asking for food poisoning.
I don't agree with that overall. I don't think that just if you live in the Midwest that
I think you should not be allowed seafood unless you live near an ocean.
I mean, there's going to be river seafood as well, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't like that either. Anything that lived in water smells terrible to me, so... when it's cooked.
Kathy left so many comments, and I feel bad because we didn't acknowledge hardly any of them. She's talking about parallels to the Little House books, which, I could see that. And I have more issues with the age difference than the class or ethnic difference. Yeah, and the ethnic difference, he's German. He's still very white. I understand that he's an immigrant in that, but I don't feel like that's anything.
Can I ask a ethnic question? Is Hannah supposed to be black?
Oh, I didn't think so. She's not black in any of the adaptations.
Okay, because she's Irish in the miniseries, and I was wondering if she was supposed to be black. I feel like that would have
been specifically mentioned.
Okay.
But no, I don't think so. I think she's supposed to be Irish or... I'm trying to think what other... Because she has a specific sort of accent that she's written with.
Well, I was afraid that what I was reading was an interpretation of how slaves or former slaves spoke, and I was uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because this takes place during the Civil War.
Yeah, and this book doesn't totally sidestep, they talk about, the little Irish children who were their, bosom enemies or something with the girls at school. Irish are treated as, this whole other class. Or at the end, they talk about her allowing a little quadroon into her school, which is somebody who is 1/4 black.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, I forgot.
It's one step whiter than mulatto, which is also a word that we do not use anymore.
And that was half black, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not like there aren't moments in this where I'm like, oh God. But
how poor
doesn't
are
come
they?
Up too often.
How poor are they? I mean,
they have a servant.
Yeah.
So I'd say that was considered pretty standard to if you had a house of your own to have one servant before you really were in serious poverty and had none.
Did they pay Hannah?
I don't know how that worked. I really don't. Because I found that interesting as well when Meg is so marrying John, who's so poor, but they still have a cook, somebody to help her out.
I thought Hannah would go over and help her out.
She helped out with the babies. But Meg had somebody at the house to like do the like washing and cooking and things like that. So I was like, okay, she's got somebody like basically full time to do that, and she has Hannah helping her with the kids, and she's supposed to be poor. How poor is she really?
Right.
It's
and what
unclear
did she do all day then?
That's like she's supposed to have been doing housekeeping, which granted, in that era, basic housekeeping probably took triple the time it takes today. With everything, you know, they didn't have indoor plumbing by that point still, right? I don't think.
I don't know. They never make reference in the book to a bathroom or anything.
Yeah. Or even like a pump
or,
in the yard. Maybe there's a pump.
They also never make any reference to like an outhouse.
Yeah,
there's no reference
true.
to these girls bathing or going to the bathroom.
Yeah, no bathing. You're right, actually. That's interesting.
Well, it was probably uncouth to write about.
Yeah, I mean, like, Meg's pregnancy is completely sidestepped and the babies are delivered.
Yep.
Like, and that's it. So yeah, we have, I'm just continuing to read these chapters. In the Wilder book, These Happy Golden Years, one of Laura's friends secretly wears a switch, and is almost exposed when her boyfriend teases her by pulling her hairpins out one at a time. Oh, a switch. Oh, like the hair is fake. Laura stops him by distracting with a clump of snow down the collar. I remember that. That was Cap Garland, right? I think pulling out, it's...
Yeah, above that she says...
Mary Powers.
She says the word is switch, which were added to women's buns. So it's like...
Interesting.
It's like how we have those scrunchies that are just hair, so it looks like we've got these like fuller ponytails.
Oh, they look so goofy.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so that makes sense. All right, well, I guess we can wrap this up, but I appreciate you pegging away, as Joe would say, at finishing this book, even though initially you were just kind of like, why did I agree to this?
Initially, I really was. I was like, I don't want to do this. And then you were like, please just keep with it. And you were right. I'm glad I did. I think I would have loved it a lot more if I'd read it when I was younger, which I think is probably something you come across a lot with these childhood favorite book clubs.
Yeah, definitely.
But I definitely see its appeal. I see why it has been enduring. And I really like all the adaptations of it that I've seen. So it's definitely, it has its place for good storytelling.
I need to check out that PBS series about it.
Yeah, it's 3 episodes. They're only an hour apiece.
Is it, and it's like about Louisa May Alcott, or is it?
No, it's the one I watched is Little Women. It's
okay, and that's 3 episodes.
Yes, and then Kathy said earlier that there was a PBS something, but I don't know how easy those are to find. PBS American Masters episode.
Yeah, I don't know either.
And then she also suggested that we check out Ken Burns' Prohibition documentary because I guess the alcohol thing that, Prohibition was in the 1920s, but apparently it went back decades.
Yeah, temperance is what it was called before it was Prohibition. Temperance was meant to just be like, not that we can't have alcohol at all, but that it is for illness only, that you're supposed to be very careful with it. And Prohibition was just like, make it illegal. This is bad.
I think it's funny that they refer to using belladonna quite a bit in this book because belladonna is a fucking poison.
That's what medicine was and still is in some cases. I mean, what's chemo?
True.
But basically poisoning yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, medicine just is... There's so much that, like, I think about going, if you fantasize about, like, if I went back in time and I realized that if I went back into an era like this, even if you went to, like, a bakery and bought a loaf of bread, it would very likely be, like, half sawdust. There were just no regulations and nobody was paying, and they would just get swindled with stuff. They used to mix house plaster and water and add it to milk to stretch the milk so it would look like there was more of it. And yeah, it was just like things like that people talk about, like deregulating. Don't do it. Yeah. It's not to be trusted.
Died.
Totally.
What's your next book?
Oh yeah, good call. I I don't remember. Let's find out, shall we?
I know what
I'm
the
going
regular...
to go to unspoiledpodcast.com/book club list and find out.
I know what the regular book club next book is because I'm doing it.
That's right. So April is The Time Traveler's Wife. Mm-hmm. And the next childhood favorite is The Borrowers. That'll be fun.
Is that the one about the little people? Mm-hmm. Little tiny people?
Yeah. So, and I have a co-host that I need to get in touch with for that, but it's going to be a special guest that I have not co-hosted with before, so I will let you all know about that.
Sweet.
Once I have that nailed down. So yeah, thank you, Jaime, for doing this with me.
You're welcome.
And thank you to all of you folks who are in the chat right now. Appreciate you coming. Yay. Kathy and Agnes and earlier Chaka. Check out the book, The Poisoner's Handbook, for more on household poisons that got into human bodies. No, thank you, Kathy. I will not do that. That sounds terrible.
I might.
There's a Borrower's adaptation with little Tom Felton. Oh, I want to check that out. All right, guys. Well, thank you all again. And thank you, Jaime, for pushing through.
Sure.
And I will be seeing you all next month with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Bye.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.